What is disequilibrium? And let's start from this point. Okay, equilibrium point is given by these two conditions as we mentioned last week. The first condition here is blank screen. How about others?
Can see, sir.
We can see, sir. Disequilibrium we can see.
Is here. And where is our aggregate demand or total expenditure? It is here. And why we have Y naught and R naught? Y naught is the output level which we saw earlier on the horizontal axis. R naught is another variable which is given interest rate. So the entire economic expenditure of the country depends on these two variables, Y and R. So that's why Y naught and R naught is there. And Y naught is our equilibrium income level, which is this amount. So by that amount, we have expenditure, total expenditure or aggregate demand at this level because of the equilibrium condition. The second condition, equilibrium condition, is given by this I equal S equal I, that is savings equal investment. So when you go to this circle out here, then you see S depends on the level of income. Again, it is Y naught. And I depends on the level of interest rate, which is given as R naught. The second condition. With this condition, we can identify that our income, our total output and aggregate demand, they are the same. So these conditions are given by this diagram. When you take the Y1 output level, which is the red one, there you would see a disequilibrium point. So how do you identify disequilibrium? Because it is a condition that shows excess demand or the condition that shows excess investment, and that is investment more than the planned investment. If you take Y2 output level, and that shows excess supply, so that the aggregate demand is this amount, but the total output is bigger than that. And total savings bigger than the investment. So this, in this way, we can identify this equilibrium point. So why these points are important, as we discuss in the next one, to understand the adjustment process. And we mentioned that adjustment process is not that everybody agrees on it. It is happening in the same way because of this controversy or differences, fundamental differences among the different schools of economics. So that here we get Keynesian and classical difference. Keynesian view is that whenever there is disequilibrium, the adjustment takes place through quantity. That means output level change. Output level change. If there is excess demand, output level should go up. If there is excess supply, output level should go down, which means output adjusts to meet aggregate demand. The reason for that is given because they believe in this condition, demand determines output. The second argument comes from the classical view. They believe in adjustment through price. Whenever there is excess demand or excess supply, it's not at the end of the day what would change. Any other changes in between, they are just temporary. But eventually, it is the price adjustment. Excess demand leads to higher prices. Excess supply leads to lower prices. Price level adjusts to meet excess demand or short of demand. The reason is, according to classical view, they believe in the condition, the law that supply determine output. Supply determine demand. Not output, demand. Okay, you can put it as aggregate demand. So we are going to explain this here. Keynesian view, we take the two conditions. First one, excess demand condition. What will happen there is inventories fall to meet excess demand. So the business sector responds by increasing product output, so that should rise to meet demand. For example, if you assume even a grocery shop in far away from Colombo. So maybe once a week or twice a week, the delivery vehicles come and fill the racks with all groceries. And it takes about 1 week for consumers to buy, so that by 1 week time, the business owners see that inventories are falling, so that when the delivery comes next time, it is stored again, all the goods, groceries. So that is his inventory. Milk packets, tea packets, sugar packets, soap, toothpaste, all these things, inventory, which will run through 1 week. But what will happen if there is excess demand? For some reason, we will discuss those reasons. Excess demand. Earlier, it took 7 days to exhaust, to finish all these inventories, but now within 3 days, the businessman noticed that the goods, the groceries are gone. So he has to call the deliveries within a shorter period. So the delivery guy has to collect all the supplies from the supplies again, which means the producers also realize that delivery vehicle needs more supplies within a shorter period now. So they have to produce more. In a simple way, that is how it happens. So if you take the entire country, output now rises in order to meet that excess demand. Excess supply, it is the opposite. The things would move in the reverse direction. Inventories fall. In this case, inventories rise. Why? Because customers finish it off all the buying in 1 week. Now it takes more than a week, 10 days. And still those purchases are in the inventories, all the groceries. Only part of that is gone. So when the regular time, when the delivery vehicle comes next time, the businessman, the shop owner tells the delivery van, still we have commodities left and the goods left, groceries left. We don't need that, and this only you need to fill up the couple of things only, and so that the delivery guy takes excess supplies again in his one, and he doesn't want to buy things from the supplier. And the supplier also realized that no point of producing as it used to be because there is less demand. So what happens at the end of the day? The output falls until it equals demand. So this output falls until it equals demand. Keynesian adjustment. Later on, we will discuss about classical adjustment, which is actually through price changes. We take now aggregate demand, aggregate supply, the output level on the horizontal axis, line of equality y equals AD, and our aggregate demand function AD0, and the intercept or the autonomous components of aggregate demand, which is here, the slope of the aggregate demand function, which is here less than 1 but higher than 0. We have learned those things. Equilibrium output level is Y0 at the point where line of equality and aggregate demand function intersects. So that at that point, y equals AD. That is the point. I'm taking you through this response to a reduction in interest rate. So when the interest rate is reduced, how the output market responds to it, so that we can understand equilibrium and disequilibrium and adjustment process in this way. That's why we take this as an example. So let's take that the interest rate reduce here from R0 to R1. Where does it affect? I'm going to spend a little more time on this because some of you are seeing this analysis for the first time. This is very basic, it doesn't matter, but for the first time. So because it is for the first time, I need to give things step by step. Interest rate falls. So we can look at various kind of things when the interest rate falls in the economy, but we are in a model world, right? Our model is here. This is our model. So within the model, where does the interest rate reduction it affect? That we need to understand. Interest rate, when you go back to our what we discussed last week, it affects our investment. And through investment, it affects aggregate demand. And not everywhere in the aggregate demand, as we have discussed last time. If you go back to aggregate demand equation, you find where interest rate affects. And here it affects this one, which we call autonomous components of aggregate demand, which is determined by interest rate, and the interest rate is given here as R0, and now it is R1, lower interest. What has happened to A? Here, A should go up. Why? Because investment rises. And so that I at R0, that was the level of investment earlier. Now it is I at R1 because it's lower interest rate. It should be greater than the previous. As a result, autonomous CD, that is the intercept you have seen, it should rise because new intercept should be greater. So this is our new intercept. You can see the red line and you can see the autonomous components of aggregate demand at a new interest rate. Now you can see the intersection point is here, not here. But before we go there, what we have done here is we have created excess demand in the economy with that. Excess demand. Excess demand. Excess demand creates more output because output responds to excess demand according to Keynesian. So that output should rise now to Y1. So Y1 output level is here. So earlier output level was here, now it has gone up to this. What happens? Good market, the output market, it will come to equilibrium again. but now this time it is at higher output level. So earlier it was this level equilibrium. Now it is at this level. If you look at the graph, it is at this point. That is the output market response to a reduction in interest rate within our model. Now you have seen here change in the output from Y0 to Y1. But how do we understand that change from Y0 to Y1? How much is the change? And we are going to look at that how much, and then how to have some idea, some understanding about by how much the output should rise in response to changes in aggregate. So our initial output level, this is the equilibrium condition there. Y naught equal 1 over 1 minus C. I hope you remember where you have seen it. That is the equilibrium condition. A at R naught interest rate. After the increase, this is the equilibrium output level. Y1 equal 1 over 1 minus C. There is no change here. It is the same, but there is a change here. A at R. Earlier A at R. Change in output means if you take the difference between the two, what you will get, you would get this one. You subtract the first equation from the second. So 1 over 1 minus C is common. And within bracket we have A at R1 minus A at R0. After simplifying this one, rearrange our change in output. You can see instead of this one, this is the difference between Y1 and Y0. So we can call it D1, change in output level. 1 over 1 minus C is a common thing. So we put it there, but within brackets, we have change in autonomous components of aggregate demand. That means this is the new aggregate demand. This is the previous aggregate demand. If you take the difference between the two, that is EA, and it is determined by interest rate R. Now, when you look at this one, you can understand by how much the output rise. How do we understand? Let's look at now, for example, change in output. That's what we want to know. Change in output. So it is dy. So which means the difference between the two, it can be zero, it can be negative, or it can be positive. Now the case that we have seen with economic theory is when the interest rate is reduced, investment should rise so that the intercept should rise. And by how much, we can answer that question by looking at the right-hand side. What is the value of this? 1 over 1 minus C. There is no change. It is here too, and it is here too. But if you take value, this is 1 over 1 minus C. To understand the value, we need to understand C. And the value of C we have discussed earlier. It remains between 0 and 1. So that means it should be less than 1. If it is less than 1, this portion, 1 minus symbol, C is less than 1. This is a decimal point. Only a fraction, less than 1. So 1 minus, for example, if simple C is 0.5, 1 minus C is 0.5. If simple C is 0.4, 1 minus C is 0.6. Similar to that. Lower than 1. If it is lower than 1, what is the value of the ratio? 1 over something lower than 1. So it has to be greater than 1. So we understand the meaning, the value of this portion is greater than 1. Any value, but it has to be bigger than 1. Next thing we need to understand the next component, next part of it, that is this portion. So whatever the changes that has taken place due to interest rate reduction, we have seen the vertical intercept changes on the diagram. And if we know that diagram, the distance, and that distance is given by dA, when it is multiplied by a value which is bigger than 1, that is the change in output level. I hope you got the point. For example, suppose that 1 over 1 minus C is 2 into dA at R interest rate is 10. So the output will change by 20. If it is 4 and change in autonomous components of aggregate demand is 10, then it equals 40. What is this 20 or 40? That is the change in output level. Which values determine that change in output level? These two values. What was the change here? And what is the constant value? Constant value. If it is 2, you multiply it by the change in value, that is 10. So output change would be 20. And if it is 4, output change is still 10. So the increase in output would be 40. This is one of the important factors, although it looks too simple at master's level. But one of the important factors that Keynes wrote out in his publication, so that we need to understand it a little more. There's a process of adjustment. And let's take that diagram again, model. This is the aggregate demand and the equilibrium output level at this point. Y0 is the output level. New output level after the change is Y1, change in the interest rate, reduction in interest rate, it is Y1. So you have this point and the new point. Change in output level by this amount, Y1 minus Y0. That means the difference between these two levels. But one point that we need to remember, this is a process of adjustment. So from Y0 to Y1, the country will not move overnight. There's a process. And that process may be 1 week or 1 month or 1 year or 1 decade or even more. 100 years. The process takes place moving from this location, this location. Process of adjustment over time. So let's break it into components, that process. For example, initially we had the equilibrium condition where Y0, that is this one, equals aggregate demand, which is not given here. Sorry. This amount, aggregate demand. So now aggregate demand, that is the autonomous components of aggregate demand, rise, goes up due to change in aggregate demand, and that change is due to increase in investment, and that increase in investment due to reduction in interest. Therefore, at that point, we create higher aggregate demand, which is greater than output, by increasing investment to by 10 million. What happens? Now Keynesian view is output should rise. That means as a result of this one, this output should respond, and that output response will result in an increase in aggregate demand in the economy. When the output rises, what happens? Because now we have seen consumption. Private consumption is a function of output level. So that this one should rise too. Where that is again part of the aggregate demand. So C is part of aggregate demand. That means this aggregate demand goes up. And as a result, aggregate demand rises, and as a result, output rises. Private consumption rises, aggregate demand rises. As a result, output rises. You see, it's a process. Now, this is the amount of investment that we created earlier by public investment or whatever it is. due to reduction in interest rate, so that our autonomous components of aggregate demand increase from this level to this. Initial increase is this amount. As a result, output rises this amount. So both are the same. So whatever the distance here, it is as same as this distance. When the output rises, that is Y, capital Y, consumption rises. That's what we said here. Consumption rises. And consumption is part of aggregate demand. How do we show it? We show it by this increase in consumption. And consumption is again part of aggregate demand. Now output should rise again. So you can see increase in output level. So you can see it as a process, moving upward until it comes to where? That point. But each time the changes get reduced. But it ultimately comes there. And that is the process of adjustment. Ultimately, new equilibrium is achieved. Now, let me give you a simple example to understand this one. Suppose that an investment project spend 100 million and build an apartment complex. So what is the 100 million? 100 million is this amount that we increase here. As a result, we build the apartment, and that is a construction activity. Construction activity is added to output level of the country so that we will have this increase, change in output level. Now, in that construction industry, it will generate factor income. The construction company needs to hire laborers, draftsmen, plumbers, carpenters, electricians, all kinds of professionals. And they need to hire equipment, ceramic ware, sanitary ware. What am I talking about here with all these things? Because that investment project generates some other incomes. And those incomes are two types. One is primary incomes, and those are factor income going to laborers, lawyers, draftsmen, engineers, plumbers, technicians, drivers, because they are employed here. So the investment project generates primary income. Primary income is Because of that, consumption rises because it is household income, as we have seen earlier. Primary income is interpreted as household income in our modern learning. So consumption rises. For example, if there is a technician, an electrician has a family, he needs to have his meal, and his family needs to have all the groceries. His children needs clothing and shoes and all kind of stuff for schooling. You see, consumption rises. Consumption rises. Why did consumption rise there? Because of the increase in income. And the second part, the secondary income rises. Those are raw material and material for bricks, cement, metals, light fittings, air conditioners, fans, pantries, bathrooms. They need all building materials and parts so that there is another set of uh, income outflow to those producers. And those producers have to produce again to replace that. They also employ laborers, and so that there is an increase in their labor income too. You see, it's a process. What I want to highlight now is that it goes up as a process until it reaches this point where the economy has achieved new equilibrium, and new equilibrium is, it was earlier this one, and now it is this. There is another concept that we need to understand. Okay, don't forget what our process. We look at consumption function, then investment function, then we constructed aggregate demand function, then we look at equilibrium income, then adjustment process. Now we have another concept, expenditure multiplier. That is the extent of change in output due to a change in autonomous area. So we have already seen it, but we didn't explain it much. Let's look at again change in output, which we did earlier, is this one. This is change in output. This is 1 over 1 minus C. In fact, this is change in the aggregate demand, autonomous components of aggregate demand. Now you can rearrange it to show the expenditure multiplier like this. So what is expenditure multiplier? Change in output due to a change in autonomous AD. What is the value of that ratio? Is this. So that we have, if you kept an eye on what we were discussing about, if you don't miss anything there in the previous slide, you should have understood this statement. What is the statement? Any change in A leads to a greater change in Y. Greater change in Y. Because we saw that when the value of this ratio was 2, output change was 20. When the value of this ratio was 4, output change was 40. Like that, rate change. Any change in this one will have a greater change in this. What is the reason for that? Reason is that housing, the apartment investment project, generated various kinds of incomes in other places directly in that particular project and beyond that project, because income earners from that project, they need to buy things including their plain tea and lunch, and the materials and parts and component suppliers, they also have to increase their output to cater to this project. So there are various ways income is generated. Through multiplier, and this income generation is through multiplier. So that's what is important for us, multiply. For example, if the investment project is 100 million and the output increase is 100 million, no, not 100 million, much more than that. That's why we call it multiply. But you can calculate the total effect. How do you calculate? You calculate with the, that's why it is called expenditure multiplier. Is positively related to MPC, greater than 1 and lower than infinity. Positively related to MPC means the simple C. Meaning of simple C is MPC. So the MPC goes up, this denominator value goes down. When the denominator goes down, this ratio will go up. That is the reason. Okay, so I think I have to stop there because I have to bring the other batch also to this level. But please practice and remember all these things that we did. This is very basic that we need to remember when we go to the higher discussion. And next week we are going to introduce the governance. Any questions? No questions. So thank you, and so see you next week then.
Thank you.
Thanks.